This latest DLC will have you seeing blue. Blue moon, that is. Howdy, everyone, and welcome to Cowlick Nation, the podcast where we look at real-world farming and how it affects the game we love, Farming Simulator. Now watch your step. This here is Cowlick Nation. Herbert Geweill, in 1988, came up with a grand idea. Let's go ahead and make some farm equipment. But 1988, I was a kid, so I really don't remember too much of that, and frankly, I don't think I would, because it just started out as a company with 3 people working in a family farm. That's all it was. Now, Herbert was a master machinist, so that's pretty darn cool. That's actually pretty darn cool. But like I said, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, because we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's start off with me. I can't help it, guys. But I remember as a kid going over to my aunt's house, and when we'd go over to my aunt's house, one of the coolest things that I'd get to go ahead and do with her is go to the cheese factory. Yes, the cheese factory was a lot of fun. The cooler parts were going there and watching them, getting a little tour, watching how the cheese was made. If you were lucky enough, you'd get there just at the right time where they had just finished making some fresh cheese curds. Now, I used to call those cheese curds squeaky cheese because they were so warm and moist that they would squeak in your mouth when you take a bite of them. It was pretty darn cool. It was also pretty darn cool to see all the ice cream that was being made there as well. And that was always the best part. Hands down, going ahead and getting an ice cream cone one way or another, maybe even in a dish from time to time. I know back in that time I was a fan of vanilla ice cream. I know, very original. But I had a soft spot in my heart for Blue Moon. As a kid, I had no idea what Blue Moon ice cream was, except maybe it came from the moon, and it was blue, and that's all that matters. I mean, come on. Who wouldn't like ice cream from space? Obviously, as an adult, I learned out that it's almond flavored, and hey, you know what? I don't care. It's still blue, and it's awesome, and even as an adult, I find the stuff to be rather delicious. I can't help it, guys. I just can't help it. But I grew up in the state of Wisconsin, in the US of A. And very fortunately, Wisconsin has been kind of known as this dairy state for as long as I can remember, and probably pretty much as long as it's been around. I might be a little exaggerating on that, but it stands pat. We're one of the top producers of all dairy in the US. All the dairy farms in the USA, a quarter of them, or just about a quarter of them, all are in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has over 126 cheese factories, so we got that going for us. And the cheese factories produce more than 350 different types of cheese. That's a lot of cheese. You can't make this stuff up. Unfortunately, when it comes to the amount of milk that Wisconsin actually ends up producing, well, Wisconsin doesn't produce it. The cows in Wisconsin do. We kind of fall behind one other state, and that's California, but it's not by much. It really isn't all that much. But either way, I was very fortunate to grow up in a state like this, where we have a lot of dairy farms rocking and rolling, and producing this awesome milk. What made all these cows so darn happy? I don't know. I had to think about it. I really did. Now, fortunately for myself here, I grew up, like I said, in Wisconsin, and I grew up in a small farming community. Guess what was on those farms? Tractors. Yes, there were tractors on those farms, but there were also pretty much every last farm was a dairy farm. A lot of dairy farms, actually. It was pretty cool to be able to witness a lot of the things that were happening there. I had the opportunity to have some friends, some good family friends, that were some of those dairy farmers, and it gave me an opportunity to see a lot of that stuff happen up front. The amount of time and effort that it takes to move the cows in, move the cows out, milk them, get the job done, move on. I even had an opportunity to be kind of in charge of some calves. That was kind of neat too. Got the chance to go to the milk house, get some milk, put some additive in for the calves, take it on over, feed the calves, hungry little buggers. But how else are you going to get milk unless you get the calves? So I guess it's one of them things you just got to end up having. But that's kind of the outside look of it. Now, I really wasn't a dairy farmer. And, as much as I really want to say I was a part of that atmosphere, I just really wasn't. So I had to do a little bit of digging to see what my memories from my childhood actually came up and actually made some sense to me. Now, if we go ahead and we take a look at a lot of this stuff here, the cheese factory, the cows, the dairy, all that stuff is in the farming simulator game. Not necessarily in that particular order, but you have to remember, just because we call it a dairy or a cheese factory doesn't necessarily mean that's the same language that translates all over the place. Now, the cheese factory would end up being the dairy in Farming Simulator, where you take your milk to, it produces into butter or cheese and ice cream on certain occasions. So when you go ahead and you take a look at that, that part gets taken care of. We have that correlation right there. So that part of my memory isn't absolutely shot. It's not full of lies and mysteries. That's good. But the other parts of it, I also do remember helping feed the cows. Feed the cows, mucking out the stalls, doing the things that need to have happen. Now, some of that stuff we don't have in Farming Simulator. We did in previous versions of the game, but this current version of FS22, we do not have the ability to muck out the stalls, or pretty much just go ahead and clean out the stalls from the manure. It magically spawns off to some faraway land, helping us become independently wealthy with fertilizer. I'm hoping at some point here, Giants will go ahead and bring that back, or at least make it an option that if you can go ahead and have a particular cow shed, you can go ahead and clean the stuff out yourself. I don't know. We'll see what ends up happening. But that's one step of it. I said something else in there, and that was feeding the cows. Now, all that milk that's being produced in the state of Wisconsin, that's quite a bit, actually. It really is quite a bit. And the amount of cheese that we produce in Wisconsin is second to no other state in the U.S. It doesn't even come close. We actually go ahead and produce almost 2 times the amount of cheese compared to the next closest state. So we're doing pretty good when it comes to cheese. But all that cheese and all that milk and all the dairy products that come with it, how do we get that good, wonderful, luscious, grade A milk? Well, I'd have to say it has to do with something we feed the cows. Now, currently in FS22, you have a couple different options for going ahead and feeding your cows. The number one greatest option that you can go ahead and do is make TMR, Total Mixed Ration, where you take some silage, some hay, and if you want some straw and some mineral feed, and toss it in, mix it up, slop it on down. There you go, cows, have at it. But is that all? Is that all that's going on with the cows? No. No, you go back to reality here, and that is something that happens. But there's a little bit more involved in it because there are other aspects of feeding cows that make more sense, or at least make sense, especially on dairy farms. Now, let's start off here, and I mentioned a couple things. We'll hit that stuff up real quick. Silage. What the heck is silage? I know some of us, we go ahead and we throw it in the clamp stuff, smash on it, and there we go. It comes out this brown, grassy thing that we can go pick up and sell. Take off to the BGA and make some moolah. Oh my, moolah, you like that? I like it. Wasn't even planned. But silage is actually essentially pickled grass. It's grass that's been fermented. And like I said, it kind of makes it pickled. Now, by going ahead and pickling this grass or fermenting this grass to make silage, it actually goes ahead and keeps the majority of the nutrients right in the grass or right into the food, which is mainly ending up being like the sugars and proteins that you naturally find in grass. You got to remember that grass, it's a living, breathing plant that's out there. And as soon as you cut the grass, it goes ahead and it starts to die and decay. That means the best way to go ahead and save that stuff, the nutrients that are already in it, is by making it into silage. Now, that's not the only thing that you can do with that grass. You can go ahead and windrow it up and make hay out of it, which is essentially just drying that grass out and baling it up. Now, you can go ahead and use it for the food, and you put it in the TMR. You can feed it to the cows straight up like that. But it doesn't have as long of a shelf life, and the nutrients, the cows will still eat it. It'll still put food in their bellies, but the nutrients and the raw energy that you get from the grass is just gone. It's just not there anymore. Now, I'm going to touch on that hay in just a little bit here, but I want to go on to the other things again here. The other thing that I ended up mentioning was the straw. I mean, straw is just kind of a filler. There's really no nutritional value. It's kind of like that hay. If you let that hay sit long enough, yes, it's technically hay, but it has about the same amount of nutritional value as the straw. So kind of use that as a mental block or a mental image. There's that mineral additive too. Now, the reason why you'd end up going ahead and throwing the mineral additive in is because one thing that you do find in the grass, the fresh cut grass, is magnesium. And one thing that ends up happening to older cows is that after they've gone ahead and gotten pregnant again and given birth, they've had their calf, they have to go ahead and feed these calves with milk. And what ends up happening is there's a lot of that magnesium that ends up going into the milk. Well, what ends up happening is that you end up getting a cow that ends up getting sick. So this mineral additive, it ends up going ahead and putting in this magnesium oxide to kind of help boost up the magnesium levels. And that sickness is actually called grass tetany. So it's a thing, it's out there, and you really got to be careful about it. So that mineral additive is something that's pretty darn good. Now, there's more mineral additives that you can go ahead and put in there to kind of boost the energy levels of cows, but that's one that is kind of a biggie to make sure we don't have any major issues. And like I said, it really does affect those older milk-bearing cows, so you got to watch out for them. And you'd be able to tell what's going on by the cows kind of staggering around, kind of getting clumsy, almost like they're sick and drunk at the same time. It's, from what I read, it's kind of an odd-looking sight. Almost as odd as having cows walk through buildings on the game, but we're not going to get into that right now. Now, if you remember, I told you I was going to get back to hay. Well, there's a reason for that. Because there's another thing that's out there that we can go ahead and feed cows, and we do it a lot here in Wisconsin, is alfalfa. You can go ahead and feed cows alfalfa. Alfalfa has actually been considered one of the most nutritious forages that a cow can eat. There is one problem with it. Like I said, I live in Wisconsin. We get cold weather here, cold winters. Now, farmers, they'll go ahead and they'll plant this alfalfa in the early spring, but early spring, we still have an opportunity for weather to get pretty cold here. And one thing that you have to watch out for with planting alfalfa is getting frosted alfalfa. Essentially, what ends up happening is you get frost on the alfalfa and it damages it a little bit, which those conditions would arise if you were to have more than 4 hours of temperatures below 24 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 4.4 degrees Celsius. For, like I said, for 4 hours. That stuff happens at night here in Wisconsin, so you've got to be careful about it. And the one thing that would end up happening is if cows eat that frosted alfalfa, it can cause bloat, which is essentially just a bad indigestion that the cows end up getting that could end up killing them. So you got to watch out for it. Farmers got to be careful. But that alfalfa is very, very good for the cows. And one thing we do hear a lot in Wisconsin is we'll take that alfalfa, grow it with the grass, cut it, and we'll make an alfalfa grass hay. I have seen this in person, and I've talked to this person that I work with. What they go ahead and do on their farm is they go ahead and they like to have a 60-40% grass alfalfa mix. 60% grass, 40% alfalfa, and they say it works out really, really well. So I'm going to go with them on it and trust what they got to say. But that's one of the things you can go ahead and do with that. You can also make an alfalfa silage. It's a possibility. It's something that gets done, and it's something that we don't have in the game. Alfalfa is not part of the base game, but it's one of those things that you can go and feed to animals in real life. So maybe someday we'll see it in-game as the base game. Now, we have seen it as a crop on some modded maps, but it's not a standard thing yet. Another thing that you can go ahead and find on those modded maps are cloves or clover, because that's something else that you can go ahead and do the exact same thing with alfalfa, and you throw that in there, and cows love it. They eat that stuff up. But here in Wisconsin, one crop that we do grow a heck ton of is corn. Now, a lot of you people like to call it maize, and that's entirely fine by you. That's fine. I don't care. Doesn't bother me one bit. But here in Wisconsin and here in most places throughout the U.S., we actually call it corn. So I'm just going to call it corn from here on out. And corn is an excellent source of energy. Those little kernels, they're like little energy packets for the cows. Now, normally you don't want to feed this to the cows too late at night because then they may go out party. And you know what happens when cows go partying? Oof. You don't want to know. It's scary stuff. But corn also makes incredibly great silage. You betcha it does. It makes great silage. And the silage has incredibly high energy content, which is great for high production herds for dairy farms. And these dairy cows, that's absolutely great. It gives them that energy. The cows have more energy to burn. That means they have the capability of producing more and more milk, which is one of the reasons why here in Wisconsin, we have such a high milk output. One reason why farmers really like using corn silage for their cows is it's a very low cost way to fatten them up as well. You could go off and get a bunch of chemicals and specialty minerals and vitamins and stuff like that to help the cows put on weight, but if you can grow the corn and make it into corn silage, that's just as good as anything else. Which actually brings us to the sponsor of today's podcast, and today's sponsor is dirt. Yes, you betcha. Have you ever sat and wondered about the miracles of dirt? I know I have. Dirt is one of those things that you just can't live without. It is an incredibly simple thing, but such a key part of everything that we do. From those fancy mud baths that go ahead and purify your skin, to something that you get on your hands and underneath your fingernails to show how much work you've done, to the fields where you can go ahead and put a little tiny seed in this dirt, sprinkle a little bit of water on it, and voila! A couple months later, with some sunlight, more water, and boom, you have plants. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. And it is one of those things that you just can't have enough of in your life. You can buy it by the bag, by the truckload, by the semi-load, for crying out loud. If you want to go harvest dirt yourself, by all means, get a shovel, head on down and get yourself some dirt. It's pretty darn neat. Guys, go ahead and get yourselves some dirt today. Why? Because LockNutz sent you. Now, after going ahead and taking a look at all that different type of food that you can feed cows, it starts to make you think, how do we go about doing this now? There's several options. In Farming Simulator, we have the option to go ahead and gather up all of their grass or your forage or anything like that. You get chaff. You take that and you throw that in the bunker silo, smash it down, pack it up, move it around, cover it, and make yourself some pickled grass. You betcha. It's a good thing. Very cheap to do too in game. The big problem with that is that if you need to do it on any sort of scale whatsoever, you need to have a lot of room because those bunker silos are absolutely huge. They are much cheaper than using the alternative, but, it's there. Now, what is the alternative, you might ask? Well, the alternative is going ahead and cutting grass, baling grass, wrapping that grass bale, letting it ferment, and then you can make little pickleballs out in your field. You betcha. Pretty darn neat. It's pretty darn neat. Now, in game already, we already have a couple options to do that. You have some of the balers that allow you to go ahead and wrap the bales as you're going ahead and baling. So that's something you can do. You can drop the bales on the ground, come around, pick them up, wrap them, and then move on. You have those for options. You also have a stationary bale wrapper that makes those big, long sausages. Who doesn't like a sausage? I mean, come on. Which brings us back to our friend Herbert Gerweil. Now, I'm doing my best to pronounce his name because, gosh darn it, he did a good job. He has a company, he started it up, and from what I understand, it's one of the bigger companies out there, the better brand names that are out there for balers and bale wrappers. They've kind of pioneered a couple things that we'll talk about in a little bit, but for starters, let's get to know what's going on with Gerweil. Well, like I said, in 1988, he went and started his company in Kirchschlag, which is in Upper Austria. The company started on the family farm with only just 3 employees, and by 1989, they had gone ahead and developed their first wrapper that had an arm that kind of wrapped around the bales to make all the magic happen. But after that first year, Herbert knew something wasn't quite right. The baler worked, but it didn't work as well as he thought it could. So what they ended up doing is taking that bale wrapper and ripping it all apart, putting it back together, re-engineering it, and making it something absolutely wonderful. By the time 1991 came rolling around, the family garage was way too small for this growing operation, and they had to start building new buildings. By 1994, Herbert had gone ahead and developed 300 windrowers out there rocking and rolling out in the fields, trying to collect the grass, trying to rake it up, trying to do all this stuff with it. But he seen the winds were about ready to change, and round balers where the future was headed. So after that, he decided to go ahead and refocus his efforts on trying to make a bale wrapper for round bales, and come 1997, his focus paid off because they had gone ahead and made a combination bale wrapper that worked perfectly with a John Deere baler, and that John Deere baler combination with the Gervell bale wrapper actually won a silver medal at the Agrotechnica, which I've never heard of that until that point, but a silver medal for something that you've been putting a lot of effort into, that's pretty darn good. I'll take it. And then after 1997, development kept on happening. The status quo was not good enough, and steady growth kept the company moving forward, growing and having different locations, satellite locations, if you will, in Switzerland, Belgium, and with another location in Austria. Which brings us to March 21st, 2023, where the Gervell Pack DLC will be introduced or rolled on out for everyone to go ahead and purchase and use. And it's looking to be kind of a neat setup that they got going on here, which you'll have a couple different options, from a round baler to a baler that wraps the bales as well, to a round bale wrapper, a couple different options in that, a square bale wrapper, and then grabbers for both round bales and square bales. Now, the names and technical terms, the Q Profi, the RGB, RT, GQU, Vario Master, LT Master, I could talk to you guys about that stuff, but for crying out loud, guys, I don't think you want to know about the names and all that jazz. What you guys want to know about is you got some pretty cool looking bale wrappers that are coming out. There's a couple static balers, which means they just kind of sit in one place and you bring the stuff to it. There's a PTO bale wrapper, which looks pretty cool, and then a pull behind bale wrapper that's going to look pretty neat. But I think the two cool parts that we're looking at with this pack are the combination bale wrappers. Now, those things have like a nice little belt system where you can take your chaff or your grass or whatever it is that you're harvesting, your corn even, you can bring that on over, dump it into this conveyor system, and it'll take it on off and make it into a silage bale. Pretty darn neat. It's a static stay in place sort of thing, but the implications of this are pretty darn cool, especially considering now that we have these new buildings, these new storage facilities for bales. You could have one of those static balers. They're the master ones that have this name to it, this ability to it. You could take these master balers, have them set up directly at this bale storage that just came out, and have all your bales offload right into this thing. Click a button, there you go. They're stored right away. No maneuvering stuff around, no nothing. Now that's pretty darn slick. Now, I don't know if you're going to go ahead and use this DLC in this particular fashion, or if you're even going to use this DLC. Now, I know there's a bunch of you guys out there that are like myself, that after some of the DLCs we've had so far on FS22, you might be a little gun shy. You might be a little gun shy about it, and I don't blame you. We've had some DLCs that are great for the game, adding brands to it, giving us a little bit different taste on how to go about doing stuff. From the Antonio Carrera pack all the way up to this Platinum DLC where we got the Volvos and the extra production places. We have been on the fence, I'd say, for most of us on if this is the right thing that we want to do. And with this being the Pioneer DLC for the Season 2 pass, I'd say there's a pretty big bar to hurdle after what we've seen from Season 1. The way I go and take a look at it is that you have to realize Giants is a company. Farming Simulator is a game. We all love playing the game. We all want to see the developments. Giants has to be a company and make money in order to do that, which unfortunately means that they have to charge for some of these DLCs. Now, that's just the way it is. And if that means by getting bigger brands and different brands to come in and work with them and allow them to make more money, well, gall darn it, we got to let it happen. The only thing that I'm hoping for, and I got my fingers crossed, is that this pans out. Because I tell you what, I really am looking forward to seeing those blue balers out on the fields. Because it really does bring me back to those days where I'm at the cheese factory, picking out my ice cream, and oh yeah, you betcha, it's Blue Moon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cowlick Nation. Hopefully you'll head on back sometime, and don't worry, we'll have coffee on for you. Thanks for stopping by.